We have Yehuda Lindell, full cryptocurrency custody solution based on MPC and threshold ECDSA.
Okay, thank you very much. I won't say the B word in my talk, though. This is a joint work with Ariel from Bar-Ilan University and Samuel Ranellucci from Unbound Tech. The motivation is very clear. A lot of people have invested real money in digital currency, in cryptocurrencies. And that money that they've invested or put in is actually at great risk. It's not a theoretical risk. If you do a quick Google search, you'll see a large amount of theft of money from exchanges, from wallets, over time getting worse and worse. And it's a real problem that we have to solve. And if we want to solve this solution, there are actually 3 different scenarios that we need to address. And we'd like to build a platform, or we have built a platform which actually addresses all of those 3 in terms of its flexibility. The first is exchanges. So exchanges are a way of enabling you to buy cryptocurrencies, sell cryptocurrencies, and exchange also between different currencies as a way of, I guess, managing your portfolio. There's a relatively high turnover. There's a necessity to be able to transfer funds at high frequency. And they actually have a real need to speed up their transaction rates. The problem is that because of the threat of theft, most of these exchanges have different size vaults, and they have a small amount of currency in small vaults that are connected, and you can transfer funds relatively easily, but they have the larger vaults completely disconnected from the network. And then when you want to transfer a large amount of funds, they have to transfer from the larger vault to a medium or smaller vault, and that takes time. And in fact, the largest exchanges can take days and actually sometimes only promise you 2 weeks to get your money back, which is a very big pain point, obviously. And so you'd like to improve that. And for this, you need to have a separation of vaults, of different levels of security, and of usability of speed around that. A second scenario that's of great interest is that of custody. Large financial organizations and banks manage or provide custody solutions for general assets, and they're interested in providing also custody for crypto assets. And here we're talking a very small turnover. So the situation is I have $1 billion that I want to invest in cryptocurrency, and what I want is I want this bank or financial organization to give very, very strong protection so they won't get stolen. I don't need to transfer lots of funds in and out very often. However, I do need to get my money back reasonably fast, because if the whole market is crashing and it takes 2 weeks to get your funds back, then it's already much, much too late. And this is a solution that's offered to high-end customers. And the final scenario is that of a wallet. This is something that holds a small amount of currency, typically used by individual people, and possibly is used actually for carrying out transactions. Although how much that will happen is yet to be seen. So what are the requirements on such a platform? The most obvious is that of security, but I want to stress something that's often missed in this space. When we think about security, so we all know that what protects cryptocurrency is a signing key. And so you think about the possibility of stealing someone's signing key. But in this setting that we're talking about, that actually isn't really the threat. The threat is actually fraudulent key usage. If I can use your key once, then I can generate a signature that transfers all of your funds, and I'm done. So I don't need to steal the key if I can use it. So if I give you the strongest hardware that protects your key, but I can access that hardware and generate a signature, then I actually haven't solved the problem at all. So of course we want to prevent key theft, but primarily the problem is that of fraudulent key usage. There's also issues of backup and disaster recovery. If I'm putting $1 billion into a cryptocurrency custody solution, I want to make sure that the key is not lost, even with very small probability. Because very small probability on a very, very large amount of money equals quite a high expectation of loss. We all know of stories of people losing their keys and losing the cryptocurrency, but a bank cannot take that risk, likewise an exchange, and therefore we need to make sure that's built in. There also needs to be flexibility, fine-tuning usability or speed of transaction with security, as in the exchange example of different vaults of different sizes. It needs to support different coins and systems, different signing algorithms, different standards like BIP 3244 for key derivation, and all of that needs to be provided in order to have really a full platform to secure these assets. So the cryptographic core of our solution is a threshold signing protocol, or actually a suite of threshold signing protocols. So we support ECDSA, EDDSA, and Schnorr. EDDSA and Schnorr I won't talk about today because they're actually relatively easy in the sense that they're MPC, what we call MPC-friendly signing algorithms. It's a linear computation which can be made very efficient with MPC. ECDSA, on the other hand, is much more difficult. Our protocols support distributed key generation because you don't want to have the key present at any specific time. And if you think in your mind, okay, but I only generate a key once anyway, so maybe it's not such a problem, I'll do it disconnected. In this space, it's not true. Very often, you're generating keys all the time, and a lot of people, essentially the common practice is to generate a new key for every transaction, essentially. But even if not, it makes it much more difficult to really have a disconnected secure platform, so we need distributed key generation. It achieves also proactive security, which what I heard people call here in previous talks post-compromise security. So even if some of the machines holding shares of the key are compromised, we want to make sure that we recover from that so that an attacker has to breach a full quorum of signing parties in a single period in order to be able to attack anything. We support rich access structures, so that means that you can have a different number of sets of parties with different thresholds in each set and or between them. Why would you want that? Think of a crypto custody solution offered by a bank. Then the bank would want to say that I need both parties at the customer and at the bank to carry out the signing transaction. In particular, the bank would like to be able to go to a court of law and have a cryptographer come and testify that there's no way the bank by themselves could have transferred the money out. And then I would also like to say that at the customer, you'll have 3 out of 5 parties from one business unit and 2 out of 4 from the management to carry out this transaction. At the bank, there'll be also possible different subsets that can approve the transaction. We also support two types of parties, and this is quite unique to our solution. We have both online signing parties and offline authorization parties. Online signing parties are what you would think of in a threshold signing scenario. You have a set of parties, and they have to participate in the computation in order to carry out to generate the signature. The offline parties are only authorize the computation, only authorize the signature, but don't actually participate actively in the protocol. And the reason we want that is because you can imagine a case where you have a number of parties who have to authorize the operation. They want to do it from their mobile wherever they are, and they won't necessarily be online all at the same time. So it's like an asynchronous authorization that the signature can take place. And forcing all of them to be online at the same time can be difficult. And what we do is we therefore have shares of the secret key also at these offline parties who reshare them to the online parties. And the security model that you get is that during signing, an attacker has to corrupt a full quorum of signing parties in order to cheat. But not during signing operations. Even if you corrupt all of the online parties, you still can't learn anything because the shares are also at the offline parties and you have to corrupt also a quorum there. So that's the property that we would get from that. So this is just an example of maybe you have a custody setting, you have a service provider, you have even an additional third-party trustee, you have the customer, they all hold shares of the key and they have to participate in order to generate any signature. And this is what gives you the strong protection against fraudulent key usage. Okay, there's no, because you need so many different parties from different places and you have strong separation between them and you need them all to participate in generating the signature, it's not possible to, for example, breach the machine that's connected to secure hardware and generate a signature because there just isn't any single place like that. I'll come back to the protocol later on in the talk, but what I want to stress now is that there's a difference between a protocol and a platform. The threshold cryptography, the threshold signing protocol that we have at the core is of course central to the solution, but there are many other elements that are needed, and I'm talking about cryptographic elements and not just obviously the systems and engineering elements which are important, but not related to what I'll talk about. So the things that I mentioned beforehand, like secure backup and disaster recovery, supporting standard key derivation, like this BIP key derivation that's done from a master key, proactive security, party administration, all of these things have to be done in a way that connect up to the threshold signing protocol. So if I'm deriving a key via SHA-512 onto a master key with some path string, then the result of that MPC to do that operation has to be shares that will then feed into the threshold signing protocol. And if I'm doing backup, then I'm not doing backup of a key that I hold, which is what we're used to doing. I'm doing backup of shares of keys. And I'll show in a moment why that's actually not so trivial. And all of that is needed to get this platform. So let's talk for a moment about the backup. Typically, you think of, so what's the problem we want to solve? We want to make sure that the bank or the exchange will always be able to get back the key and there won't be any danger that it's lost. So the scenario we're thinking of is you have some standard key like an RSA key pair, and the private key is in an HSM sitting in a bunker somewhere deep below the earth that requires 5 people to come and open the safe and also to input physically some password in order to open it. And if you think I'm talking about something imaginary, I'm actually not. Banks do have such systems for other uses, and they're interested in using that also for this scenario. So that's not an imaginary thing, that's actually what they want to do. And what you would think is I take the private key and encrypt it with this RSA key, and then you store that, replicate it many places, and you're done. The problem is that we don't hold the key, we only hold shares of the key. So that's fine, it's very easy. Each party will just encrypt their share of the key, and that's all that you need to do. The problem is that what happens if one of the parties is corrupted and encrypts an incorrect share? That's not something that you can detect because you just get an RSA encryption, and now your entire disaster recovery and backup is made completely useless. And since we're talking about protecting millions and possibly billions of dollars of assets, that's not something which we can afford to have, and therefore we need to have some zero-knowledge proof that each party will prepare to show that they've actually backed up the correct share, and only after we've verified these backups are we willing to actually transfer funds into the system. Okay, that's the idea. And what we do is we have a cut and choose type zero-knowledge proof, where essentially you encrypt either a random value or the difference between a random value and your share, and then you open one of them and you verify that these values all match up. It's not difficult to do, it's just something which is crucial. By applying Fiat Shamir, you get a non-interactive proof that's publicly verifiable, so each party, after key generation of the ECDSA or whatever threshold protocol you're doing, will then generate an encryption of its share. This will all be verified, and only then will the key be declared as one that can be used. Another component that we need is key derivation. So there are standards called BIP 32 and 44. For those of you who don't know, the idea is that in many cases, especially when you have wallets, you have a master key that you want to back up, and you will derive all keys in the future from that master key by applying SHA derivation to some path and the master key. In a case like a custody solution or exchange solution, you don't mind generating backup every time you generate a key, but in like a wallet scenario, that's not something that's viable. Now, a similar problem arises here like beforehand. What happens if, when we want to do this derivation, which we're doing in MPC, so because obviously we're not going to hold the key in any place, so we're doing some MPC via garbled circuits or something else in order to generate the derived key. The result of that is shares that are then input by the parties into the ECDSA protocol. Now you have to make sure that the parties input the correct results from that MPC into the protocol, otherwise again you're getting something which will not be a valid key. More importantly, or more interestingly, you have to make sure the parties input the correct share of the master key. Because if they don't, then what will happen is we'll generate a valid ECDSA key and everything will be fine, but if you want to reconstruct that private key from the master key, you won't be able to because one of the parties input an incorrect value. And the crucial point you have to understand is that MPC protects the process of computation, but not that you input the correct value. MPC doesn't say anything about using correct values, but only that from the only thing that's learned is the output. If I input some incorrect value, that's not inside the scope of MPC. So we have an MPC protocol that actually enables you to do this in a verified way. I won't go into the details, but the idea is that you generate shares of the new key and of the old key, and the parties don't know which shares that they've got, and therefore they're unable to cheat, and you can verify that the shares of the old key indeed are the old key, and then the new key is the one that is actually used afterwards. As I mentioned, we also have proactive or post-compromise security, and this is achieved by essentially adding a random polynomial, using Shamir sharing, a random polynomial with a zero constant term, and we also have party administration. I want to note that one of the important aspects that you get here that you don't get with multi-sig type solutions, beyond the fact that multi-sig is much more limited and doesn't exist on all platforms, is that if an employee leaves the company, then you need to make their share of the key be invalid. Otherwise, they're walking around with a valid share and they shouldn't have that capability anymore. In multi-sig, you would actually have to transfer the funds now because there's no way of invalidating that key. But here it's easy. You can reshare, and then that share becomes completely invalid. Okay, now back to the threshold ECDSA, which is the core of our solution. So it's actually been a long-standing problem to simultaneously achieve the following two properties. First, what we call full threshold, and that means that you need a quorum to sign, and anything below that quorum, any subset below that quorum is unable to generate any signature or cheat in any way. And to get that simultaneously with efficient key generation in the multi-party case has been a long-standing open problem. So for the two-party case, we have solutions, very recently have very efficient solutions. And for the multi-party case, there was work going back to the late 90s of Gennaro et al. And Hugo, who's here, and, but they don't get full threshold. And for any number of corrupted, so with full threshold, there's a work by Gennaro et al. From 2016, but that protocol requires the parties to generate in a distributed way a pair key, a shared pair key, and there's no practical way of doing that. We can do this practically with two parties. The best result was from crypto last year. It takes 40 seconds for two parties, so it's an expensive operation. For multi-parties, we don't even have any protocol that's been implemented. There are theoretical protocols. It's unclear at all that this is practical. So we presented a new protocol for ECDSA at CCS last year. Relies on the hardness of pair and DDH. And in parallel, Gennaro and Goldfeder also presented a protocol that has similar performance but works in a different way. To explain our protocol, at least the high-level idea behind it, let's just review briefly what ECDSA signatures are. So we have G, which is a generator of an EC group. We have the message M to be signed, and we have to generate this equation where X here is the private key, K is a random value, and R is generated by computing K times G. You get a point, and then you take the X part of that point modulo Q. And then the signature is R and S. Now, what makes ECDSA annoying for MPC people is this K inverse and R over here, which is derived from K. You have to generate this capital R and this K inverse in a distributed way, and that's a non-linear operation. That's actually difficult to do in MPC. Okay, and that's what makes it different from Schnorr or ECDSA that don't have this inverse type thing, and therefore they're much easier, much more friendly to MPC than ECDSA is. So that's the main challenge, and the solution that Gennaro et al. Provided in 2016 to do this is as follows. The parties generate shares, random shares, Ki and rho I. Ki is the shares of that K value I mentioned, and rho I are random shares of a random mask. And then we use additive sharing, so we just define K to be the sum and rho to be the sum of those values. And then each party can send Ki times G. So the Ki there is protected because of the discrete log assumption, and they send an encryption of row I under some additively homomorphic encryption. And this also requires zero-knowledge proofs to make sure you're doing everything correctly, and that's actually difficult and expensive, but I won't go into the details of that. After the parties get these values, they can add all the ki times g together to get capital R, and they can use the additive homomorphism to get an encryption of rho. So we're assuming an additively homomorphic encryption scheme, so we just add those and get rho, and then each party can multiply their scalar ki into the ciphertext to get ki times rho. And once again, we send that to everyone, you add them all together, and what you actually have now is k times rho. So you have an encryption of k times rho, and note that rho is random and perfectly masks k. I want to stress that in ECDSA, if you learn k, you can get the secret key out. Okay, so we have to make sure that k is not revealed. But it's k times rho, and once we have that, you can just run distributed decryption to get that value. And when you have k times rho in the clear, you can invert it, and now you have k inverse times rho inverse, and that's actually enough to complete the process. I won't go into the details of the rest, but that's really the main difficulty in doing what we're doing. And as I mentioned, Gennaro et al. Used Payer, which is the only additively homomorphic encryption scheme that we have, and that's why you get stuck, because it means you have to have distributed key generation of that, and we don't have that efficiently. So what we do is something different. We use what's called additively homomorphic El Gamal and the exponent. What is this encryption scheme? The encryption scheme is exactly like El Gamal, except that instead of adding A here, you add A times G. Okay, so you're encrypting A by adding A times G, and this is additively homomorphic because if I give you two encryptions, U, V, and X, Y, then you have an encryption of A times G here and B times G here, and if you just add all of these points together, then everything comes out to be a valid encryption of A plus B times G. So it's an encryption of A plus B that's trivially additively homomorphic. You can also multiply by a scalar in a similarly simple way. And this has fantastic advantages. Firstly, the encryption that we're using now is in the same group as the signature we're generating. Now, I didn't go into the details of what's difficult here, but when you're working in Payer and in some smaller group, then you have lots of problems of leakage because of different group sizes and possible cheating because the modular are not the same. And this is all solved by working in the same group. Secondly, zero-knowledge proofs are now all really efficient. They're all the standard Diffie-Hellman, discrete log, sigma protocols that we know and love. They're all simple. And key generation is highly efficient, simple, and also distributed decryption. There's only one small problem. You can't decrypt. This is not a valid encryption scheme because, exactly, I know it's funny, but we'll solve the problem. It's not that we're leaving it at that. So you can't decrypt because if you run the general decryption, what you'll get back is A times G. But A times G requires you to solve the discrete log problem to get A. Now, if you use this on small values, which was the original use of this scheme, then you can actually solve the discrete log. But in our setting, what we're going to get is an encryption of the signature. That's what we get at the end, and that signature is essentially, that S value is a random element in the group. So you're unable to decrypt, and so our entire idea seemingly falls apart. The solution to this is actually a general idea that I think can be used elsewhere to enable the use of El Gamal and the exponent when you want additively homomorphic encryption in an interactive scenario. The idea is that in parallel to working in El Gamal, the parties hold additive shares of the values and use direct addition and multiplication protocols to generate shares of the results, but in a not necessarily correct way. So if we have additive shares and we want to add them, that's easy, we just locally add. If we want to multiply, there are pairwise multiplication protocols that are reasonably efficient, are in fact quite efficient, but they don't guarantee correctness. They don't guarantee that an adversary cannot cheat. And correctness here is a problem because if you cheat and do something incorrect, you can actually cause a breach of privacy. So what we do is we run in parallel everything inside El Gamal and the exponent, and we prove correctness. And we run this private multiplication protocol and private operations without any correctness. And at the end, we have A, or whatever value it might be, and we have an encryption of A times G, and we just have to check that that they match. And that's easy to do because proving things inside these groups is very easy. And if they match, then you can reveal, and we're finished. And you can instantiate these private multiplications either using pair or using oblivious transfer. Oblivious transfer is very, very efficient. There are very efficient private multiplications, but it's a lot of bandwidth. And since we're thinking of scenarios where you might have a mobile or a very different types of machines all over the world, we wanted to make sure we have low bandwidth. And so we're using a pair-based multiplication that's more expensive computationally, but has very low bandwidth. But I want to stress that each party has their own local pair key, and so you don't actually have to do distributed key generation. We ran experiments on this protocol in AWS with very basic, not powerful machines. We ran between 2 and 20 parties. We used the pair-based private multiplication. The oblivious transfer set is much faster, and we have open conjectures on making the pair protocol faster, but currently these are the times that we have. For key generation, it's between 10 seconds and 30 seconds. But actually, the majority of that time is each party generating safe primes. So when you want to generate multiple keys, you only have to do that once, and the second and third and fourth and 100th keys are actually very, very fast. In terms of signing, it's a few hundred milliseconds for a few parties, up to about 5 seconds for 20 parties. It's not as fast as we'd like in many scenarios, but let's think about what we're talking about. We're talking about a crypto custody scenario. A large number of signers will only be used for these very large amounts when the rate is low, and therefore this actually solves all the problems that we need for our application. So in summary, presented a new threshold ECDSA protocol. It supports practical key generation, signing, proactive security. There's a new paradigm there for using additively homomorphic encryption MPC, which may be interesting elsewhere. And it's a full platform that provides the functionality that you need for exchanges or wallets or custodian solutions. It's also suitable for other scenarios where fraudulent key usage is very problematic, like, for example, a root CA. Such a system might also be very useful there. And it includes things like backup, key derivation, and this online-offline separation. And the security is based on a model of separation, which basically means as long as you can have enough parties in separate environments and with different defenses, that it's hard or almost impossible to get to them all, then you're guaranteed security. So thank you very much. I just want to note that the two-party solution for wallets is actually open source, and you can have a look at it there. Thank you.
So we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Maybe I'll take this one. Okay, so usually in the cryptocurrency setting, they use multi-signatures to solve similar problems. So there's clear advantages in doing this, but also disadvantages. So I guess maybe it would be worth saying a few words about that.
Firstly, you can always use a multi-sig and have some of those multi-sig signatures generated using such a system. Multi-sig has the disadvantages of you can't replace parties in and out. It's not supported by all of the currencies. Many currencies actually don't support them. And even those that do support them, there is a cost for using it, a transaction cost, and also a limit to the generic access structure you can get. So this is a much more powerful solution. Another question?
Near the beginning of the talk, you mentioned doing like BIP32 derivations in like a garbled circuit or something. But a BIP32 derivation is like on the order of 1 million gates or something. That's quite non-trivial. Have you actually implemented that? No?
Not anymore. Million gates is not a lot anymore. MPC has really come a long way. It's not 1 million gates, by the way. It's SHA-512, which, if I remember correctly, is about 50,000 gates.
Yeah, but then you've got to do... Well, there's an HMAC at each stave.
So it's HMAC, so it's actually you need two. You need two, so it's about 100,000.
Yeah, so 100,000 times the number of levels you have.
No, you don't need to do. What you do is for each time you derive, you store the shares of each node that you derive. So you only need to go down the path once.
Yeah, I see. Can you give like a swag of what your performance looks like for that?
It's in the open source, so you can play around with it, but it's things in the round of 100,000 gates is in like the hundreds of milliseconds, not more than that. I think less than that even. Tens to hundreds of milliseconds.
Yeah, thanks.
I was curious, for a lot of these institutions, something that's really important is proving ongoing possession of the keys, and that things that's like that for audit purposes. Is there a further leveraging of ZKP that you could use for that in an ongoing way, or is that open for the moment?
I think that the backup is what you have to make sure that you can't ever lose what you have. In general, with these types, if you ever want to check that we actually have the key shares, you can always ask us to sign on some special audit message. And if we can sign, then we obviously have the shares. So that would be easier to solve in that way, on an application at the application layer rather than the crypto layer.
Thank you.
Let's thank Yehuda again.
Thank you very much.